My own son handed me a bottle of bourbon and whispered, "This will kill you faster than time ever could." The right mint. I wish I could tell you he was joking. But when I looked into his eyes that night, I saw no trace of humor. Only calculation. The kind of cold stare you expect from a stranger in a dark alley. Not from the boy whose first steps I once caught in these very arms. It was my birthday in Chicago. Snow piling against the porch. The house too quiet for a celebration. He placed the polished bottle on my kitchen counter as if it were a trophy. A gift wrapped in ribbon. Gleaming amber inside thick glass. And then he said it again. Softer. Like a secret meant only for me. "Don't sip too slow. Dad. Enjoy every drop." Tension. Hours later, I stood alone in the kitchen. My hand trembled over a crystal glass. Not because of age, but because of a single message from my granddaughter. "Emily. Grandpa. Don't drink it. Please." I saw what he did. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp. My pulse thundered. The bourbon in front of me no longer looked like a gift. It looked like a loaded gun disguised as kindness. And in that moment, I knew this birthday wasn't about celebration. It was about survival. He won of this. I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, staring at that bottle as if it might move on its own. The amber liquid glowed under the overhead light. Beautiful and menacing. I thought about pouring it straight down the drain. But I couldn't bring myself to move. Instead, I listened to the old clock on the wall tick. Each second, louder than the last, pulling me deeper into memory. To anyone looking in from the outside, my family would seem ordinary. A retired father, 2 grown children, and 1 granddaughter who still called me her hero. But behind the polite smiles and family photographs, the fractures had already begun to spread like cracks in old plaster. Marcus, my son, had always been ambitious. Too ambitious. He was the kind of man who spoke about money as if it were oxygen. I used to admire that drive when he was younger. I thought it meant he would build something better for himself. But over the years, that drive shifted into something harsher. He stopped asking about my health. He stopped visiting unless he needed something. And every conversation turned, sooner or later, to what I had, what I owned, and what would be left after. For Ingis, Emily, my granddaughter, was different. She had her mother's soft voice and her grandmother's gentle eyes. At 14, she was too young to carry the kind of fear that vibrated through her text message tonight. For her to send those words, she must have seen something with her own eyes. Something that stripped away the innocence she should have been allowed to keep. The quiet house carried me back to last summer. When we all gathered in the backyard for the 4th of July, my daughter Claire brought a homemade pie. Laughing as she set it down. Emily played in the grass with the neighbor's dog. And Marcus, he didn't laugh. Not once. He spent most of the afternoon pacing by the fence, taking calls on his phone, his voice sharp and low. At one point, he walked over to me, glass in hand, and said, "Dad, you know you can't hold on to all of this forever. You've had your time." I brushed it off then, thinking it was just stress. But the memory hits me different now. The truth is, I'd been blind. I wanted to believe my family was still whole, that we could sit together without knives hidden beneath the table. Tonight, staring at that bottle, I felt every mile of distance that had grown between us. And in that silence, with snow drifting past the window, I realized I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting Emily. Too, the only one brave enough to speak the truth. My hand finally reached for the phone. I typed back, "What did you see?" My finger hovered, then pressed send. The screen glowed in the dark room, waiting for her reply. I knew that whatever came next would change everything I thought I knew about my son. about my family, about the life I had spent 75 years building. It took only one dinner to see that something had shifted in my son. October at the harborside. A quiet place on the lake. Marcus picked it. He said it would be nice to catch up. He arrived 10 minutes late, breathless, with lines that felt rehearsed. A meeting ran over. Traffic was a mess. He set his phone face down, like a man performing calm. He ordered steak. I ordered chowder. For a while we spoke like strangers. Weather. Construction. He laughed in the right places. But his eyes never softened. Then he asked about the house. How much do you think it is worth now? His tone was casual. His eyes were not. He had done math before he sat down. I saw numbers moving behind his stare. It is worth whatever memories are inside it. I said, your mother planted the lilacs. Your sister learned the piano there. Emily took her first steps on the hall rug. I do not measure that in cash. He smiled the way a banker smiles at a poem. Dad, I am asking because I care. You should not be climbing ladders. We can free up the equity and make your life easier. Sell now while rates are good. You could move near Claire. Near Claire means near you. I said. He did not deny it. He reached into his briefcase and set down a folder. It was thick with printouts. Housing comps. Tax projections. A budget that already included my money. Yellow highlights glared on white paper. I closed the folder. Son, I am not ready. Ready for what? He leaned forward. Ready to admit you do not need 4 bedrooms. Ready to admit time moves faster now. Ready to let me help before something happens. What do you think is going to happen? People fall. People forget stoves. He kept his voice soft. If you sign a few things, we can take the stress off you. I can manage the bills. Add me to the accounts. Update the will. It will be cleaner. For you, for all of us. There it was. The first outline of what would later wear a ribbon. He wanted the keys now. Not after grief. I looked at him and saw the boy who once cried because he could not tie his skates. I had sat on a cold bench and taught him loops. Now he was offering loops of a different kind. I pay my own bills. I said. I still cook my meals. I walk to the post office because I like the air. The only thing I forget is where I left my glasses. He smiled again. It did not reach his eyes. I know you can handle yourself. But we should be smart. For example, what time do you take your blood pressure pill? The doctor changed your medication last summer. Right. Any dizzy spells? Ever feel lightheaded after dinner? He asked in a tone that sounded like care. But each question landed like a measurement. Why do you ask? He lifted a shoulder. I just want to understand your routine in case I check on you. Also, do you still have a drink most nights? A small one. Bourbon or rye? He said bourbon as if he were testing a key. I did not answer. The waiter came to ask about dessert. Marcus waved him off and reopened the folder. If we form a living trust, the transfer is simple. You can stay in the house. But I handle the hard parts. There is no point in dragging this out. He slid a pen toward me. He had brought a pen as if this were a closing. I pushed it back. I said his name. He stopped. For a moment, the noise of the room rushed in. Silverware. A couple arguing in whispers. Something old inside me lifted its head. Pride. Anger. Love trying not to flinch. I am not signing today. I said. I am not signing this year. If you want to help, come on Saturdays. Bring a ladder. I could use a hand with the gutters. His jaw worked. He tried one more smile. Then he said it. The sentence that scraped the air raw. You have had your time. Dad. Maybe it is time to stop pretending this is still your story. I set my spoon down so gently it made no sound. I wanted to tell him about the winter his mother was sick. And I took night shifts and day shifts and still made it to his games. I wanted to ask when I had turned from father into obstacle. This will be my story while I am breathing, I said. He stared at me a long time. Then he gathered the folder and the pen and tucked them away. We did not hug in the doorway. The wind off the lake made him squint. He walked away without looking back. On the bus home, I watched the dark water slide past. I held the bar with one hand and the shape of his words with the other. By the time I reached my steps, the shape had a face. It was not grief. It was hunger. Weeks later, when that bottle gleamed under my kitchen light, I finally understood what the folder at the harborside had been. Not a plan. A countdown. A man does not ask for your pill schedule unless he is timing something. A man does not bring a pen to dinner unless he expects you to sign yourself away. My phone lit the counter. Emily typed. I saw him pour from a small bottle into the bourbon. I did not move. Somewhere in the city, a siren rose and fell. In my chest, another siren started. The first crack had become a fault line. I did not lose faith in my son overnight. It thins like late ice until one day a foot goes through and the cold rushes up to the knees. When I think about Marcus, I do not see the folder or the pen. I see a boy with skinned knees and a cowlick that never obeyed water. I see the years that shaped both of us. We lived in a small rental near the river when he was 8. Work was slow. I took night shifts at the plant and mornings at the marina. On Saturdays, I taught him to tie knots on the dock. He loved the bowline and the way a loop remembers the path you gave it. We ate peanut butter with honey because it was cheap. When the landlord raised the rent, I sold my fishing rods and kept the piano because his sister needed music more than I needed weekends on the water. One winter he caught pneumonia. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. I slept in a chair for 3 nights and rubbed his back until the rattle in his chest softened to a whisper. We came home to high gas bills and a refrigerator that hummed. I worked overtime and cut the cable. He never complained. He drew rockets on scrap paper and left them on the fridge. He loved hockey. The league fee felt like a mountain. I sold my truck to pay it and bought a sedan with a door that stuck. We got to the rink before sunrise. He fell 100 times and learned to stand 101. When he won his first face-off, he skated to the glass. In high school, he wanted a computer. I told him no and then found a way to say yes. I took a second job on weekends moving furniture. He learned to code in the glow of that screen. He built a small game where a skater jumps cracks in the ice. We laughed until milk came out of his nose. College letters came in a flurry. He stood in the kitchen with envelopes in both hands. I told him to pick the school that scared him and excited him at the same time. He chose the one with the heavy tuition and the strong program. I signed loans and emptied the small fund his mother and I had kept in a coffee jar behind the flour. The teller tried to hide her look when the coins kept coming. The day I dropped him off the dorm lawn baked under August sun. He carried a single duffel and that old computer. I waited until he walked inside before I let myself cry. On the drive home, I kept my hands steady and spoke to the empty seat. Grow, I said, but do not forget where the water came from. When his first apartment flooded, he called it midnight. I drove with a shop vacuum and a bag of tools. We worked until dawn and ate pancakes at a diner. When his car died, I gave him mine and took the bus to work. There were darker seasons. The year his marriage cracked, he slept on my couch. I learned to cook for 3 because Emily needed warm food and steady voices. He stared at the ceiling and forgot to shave. I paid the retainer for a lawyer. At night, I did the dishes slow so the clink of plates would cover the sound of a grown man trying not to cry. On Sundays, I took Emily to the park and pushed her on the swing until her laugh came back. I kept every card he ever gave me. Construction paper with glue that dried lumpy. Pen drawings of boats and rinks and stick figures with big smiles. I kept the voicemail where he said I love you after his first job offer. The voice is young and bright. I kept the schedule from the hockey league. I kept his small attendance trophy from the hockey year we nearly ran out of gas. So when I think of the folder at the harbor side, I think of all the paper that came before it. Payments and promises written in ordinary ink. Report cards and rosters. Hospital wristbands curled in a shoebox. I am not listing these things to prove I was a good father. I am listing them because they are the map that led us here. You do not arrive at a cold doorway without passing warm kitchens. If you ask me when the first crack appeared, I cannot give an exact date. Maybe it was the week he stopped asking how my day had gone. Maybe it was the first time he called and did not ask to speak to Emily. Maybe it was the afternoon he said equity like it was a prayer. Love is stubborn. I walked down to the basement and opened the old trunk beside the water heater. Inside lay our life in layers. Jerseys. A chipped mug painted with the words, "Best Dad." A program from a school concert where Claire missed her cue and smiled anyway. I took out a photo of Marcus at 10 with a bruise on his shin. His arm was around my neck. My beard was still dark. The camera caught us mid-laugh. We looked like a promise. Back upstairs, the bourbon still glowed on the counter. I set the photo beside it. Father and son. Past and present. Warmth and warning. I wanted to believe the bottle meant a celebration. The photo said, "Be careful." The text from Emily said, "Do not drink." Between those voices, my chest tightened with a grief that had not yet found its shape. I was losing a son who was already gone, and I did not know how to mourn a version of the living. The day began with lake light and the sound of the old furnace waking up. I set the table for 4 and ironed the napkins the way my wife used to. It was my birthday, the kind of winter day when the sidewalk shines and every step says, "Be careful." I salted the front stoop and left the porch light on, although the sun was still up. Claire arrived first with a foil-covered pan and a soft scarf. She kissed my cheek and told me I looked stubborn. That is her word for well. She slid the pan in my oven and fussed with the glasses. Emily came behind her with pink cheeks. She hugged me longer than usual and asked if I needed help with candles. I told her to place them where she wanted. Marcus texted that he was parking. The air shifted. Claire asked me about the soup and if the roast would rest long enough. I put on music and let a saxophone fill the gaps. Then the doorknob turned, and my son stepped in, with a wrapped box held tight to his ribs. He smelled like cold and expensive cologne. He kissed Emily on the head and shook Claire's hand like they were colleagues. He turned to me with a smile that knew what it was doing. "Happy birthday, Dad." He set the box on the counter and pulled the ribbon loose with the kind of care you give to small explosives. Inside lay a bottle of bourbon in black tissue. The glass was heavy. The seal was copper. "That is too much," I said. He lifted his shoulders. "You are worth it." He rolled the bottle under the kitchen light and whistled. 100 proof. A little fire for old bones. Try not to cough. His tone wore kindness like a borrowed coat. It almost fit. We ate in the dining room because the kitchen felt crowded with the box watching us. Emily told me about a school play. Claire passed potatoes and kept the talk off anything sharp. Marcus kept his phone face down and his glass upright. He asked me about the roof and whether my ladder was still safe. He asked if the porch light flickered and if the night made me nervous. They were questions that looked like blankets. They felt like hands on a wallet. When it was time for cake, Marcus stood too fast, as if remembering his cue. He brought the bourbon into the dining room and set it near my plate with ceremony. The cork sighed when he twisted it. That sound has always been a comfort to me. Tonight it sounded like a door easing open where no one should enter. He said, "Make a wish," and slid a clean crystal tumbler in front of me. He poured with a slow hand. He filled it higher than I pour for myself. The bourbon lapped the rim and held there like a secret. He lifted another glass for himself and grinned. "To you." To health. To a calm winter. Do not sip too slow. Claire cut the cake, but her eyes kept darting between us. Emily sat very still. She held her fork without moving. I could feel her watch the bottle. Marcus hovered near it. He kept a finger on its shoulder as if guiding a child across a street. I told myself I was being unfair. Suspicion is a habit that grows when days get quiet. I lifted the glass and brought it to my lips. Vanilla. Spice. The nose I have loved since I was young enough to think time was a straight road. I let it touch my mouth and then I set it down. Something in me balked at the last second. My hand did not shake. My conviction did. I reached for water. Marcus laughed. Do not tell me you are losing your taste for the good stuff. We moved to the living room for gifts that were small and kind. Socks. A book about lighthouses. Warm gloves. Marcus watched the bourbon across the doorway. I noticed because I did not want to. He lifted the bottle and admired the color. He said, "Old men deserve old spirits." He said the best part of winter is a pour that warms everything it touches. He said, "Enjoy every drop." Claire offered to make tea. Marcus waved her off and said the night was young. He took our glasses to the kitchen. I followed because it is my house and my sink. He rinsed the crystal and spoke to the window. We could start sorting the garage next week. There is no reason to keep everything. I can bring boxes and a shredder. I know what to keep. I know what to let go. I asked him what he would keep if it were his house. He said papers first. Deeds. Titles. Bank statements. Then the small things people hide in big places. He smiled and tapped the bottle with a fingernail. And always, the good bottles. A man should not leave those for chance. When we rejoined the others, he put the bourbon back like a centerpiece. Emily excused herself to the hallway. I figured she needed air. Marcus checked his watch and said he had an early meeting. He leaned in, hugged me, and pressed his mouth near my ear. Try not to drink alone. It is bad for the heart. They left in a storm of coats and wishes. I stood at the window and watched snow settle over the steps I salted. The house went quiet. In the kitchen, the bottle waited patient as a lighthouse. I reached for the tumbler. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket like a bird at a window. The screen lit my palm. A single line from Emily. Grandpa. Don't drink it. My stomach dropped as if the floor had given way. I stared at the words until they blurred. I typed, "Why?" And my thumb hovered before I pressed send. Seconds stretched like hours. Then her reply appeared. Each word heavier than the last. I saw him pour something into the bourbon before dinner. A small bottle from his pocket. He told me never to mention it. My knees buckled. I sat down hard in the chair nearest the counter. The bourbon glowed in the dim kitchen light. No longer amber, but poisonous. My own son had brought death into my home. And the only shield between me and that glass was the courage of a 14-year-old girl. I typed again. Are you certain? Her answer came with frightening speed. I saw it. He shook the bottle. He looked around. When I came back from the bathroom, I saw him hide the little vial in his coat. My fingers shook as I read. My hand covered my mouth, but nothing could muffle the sound of my breathing. I remembered how still she had been at the table. Fork unmoving. Eyes locked on the bottle. I thought she was nervous about the grown-ups fighting with silence. Now I knew she was watching me. Terrified, I would lift the glass to my lips. She had carried that weight through cake and gifts and forced laughter. All the while knowing what was sitting in the center of the room. The phone vibrated again. Don't tell Dad I told you. He will be angry. He might hurt me. The words stabbed deeper than any knife. My granddaughter was protecting me at the cost of her own safety. I wrote back fast. You are safe with your mother. Do not say anything more. Delete these messages, she answered. Already done. I love you. I set the phone down as if it were fragile glass. My chest ached with something that was not age. It was betrayal braided with fear. I looked again at the bourbon. It sat still and innocent. If I had lifted that glass out of habit, I would not be sitting here. I would be slumped over the sink. Another old man claimed by natural causes. I walked into the living room, my hand trailing the wall for balance. Every detail of the evening replayed in cruel clarity. Marcus's whisper at the door. His insistence I try it. His watchful eyes as the cork popped. His finger tracing the bottle's shoulder like a man staking a claim. Even his toast. To health. To a calm winter. Do not sip too slow. Every syllable now dripped with intent. I sank into my wife's old chair. The one with fabric worn thin by years of her reading. Her absence pressed around me. I wished she were here to tell me what to do. She would have seen through him sooner. She would not have let the hunger in his eyes disguise itself as care. The house felt colder though the furnace hummed. I pulled a blanket over my legs. But no warmth reached inside. My son had tried to erase me in front of my own family. And my granddaughter had seen it. Carried it. Saved me. The thought of her small hands shaking as she typed that warning nearly broke me. I rose again and returned to the kitchen. The bourbon bottle stood waiting. A monument to a plan undone. I wrapped it in a towel. Shoved it deep in the cupboard behind canned soup and dusty jars. It could sit there until I decided what came next. For now, I only knew one thing. Emily had given me time. The phone buzzed once more. A final message. Promise me you won't drink it. Grandpa. Promise me. I typed back with slow hands. I promise. Sleep. Sweetheart. You saved me tonight. Snow pressed harder against the windows. The house was silent, but for the ticking clock. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, staring at the dark cupboard and listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. A rhythm I owed to a child's courage. Morning found me still at the kitchen table. The phone face down beside a cold cup of tea. I had promised Emily. I meant to keep it. Keeping it meant proof. Fear is loud at night. Evidence is louder in daylight. I pulled on my coat and packed a small mason jar in a zip bag. I poured 2 fingers from the bourbon into the jar and wiped the rim with a clean cloth. The bottle went back into the cupboard behind the soup cans. I locked the back door and stepped into snow that squeaked under my boots. The sky was pearl. The street was empty. The university hospital sat on the hill above the river. It smelled like sanitizer and coffee. I asked for the toxicology lab and showed my license to a guard. A clerk handed me a form. Purpose of analysis. Suspected adulteration. I wrote. She looked up. In a beverage. I nodded. A woman in a white coat met me at a small window. She had kind eyes. She spoke plainly. We can run a screen for alcohol-soluble compounds and common sedatives. A full panel will take the afternoon. I said I would wait. Chain of custody mattered. My years on job sites had taught me that. I watched her label the jar with date and time and my name. She sealed it with tamper tape and carried it to the back. I sat in a plastic chair and studied a poster about drug interactions. A television showed silent weather maps. My hands would not be still. A nurse offered me water. I thanked her and asked the question that tasted like metal. If someone my age drank whiskey with a sedative in it, what would happen? She did not give medical advice. She did explain risk in human words. Sedatives slow the brain. They slow breathing. They can drop blood pressure. With a heart medicine, the drop can be dangerous. People fall. People sleep and do not wake. I watched the door to the lab like a hawk. Hours passed. At last, the woman in the coat returned with a folder. She invited me into a small room with a desk and a printer and no windows. She slid the report across to me and spoke in a tone used for bad news. We found a benzodiazepine derivative in the sample. The level is not trace. It is present in a concentration that would cause significant impairment for an older person. If consumed nightly, it could depress breathing and mimic natural decline. It would look like age. It would look like the heart gave out. My throat tightened. Could one glass kill me? She chose her words with care. One large pour could knock you down and make you confused. Combined with your medication, a fall or an arrest of breathing would be a real risk. Regular use over days or weeks would be worse. I felt the room tilt, and then steady. She printed a certified copy with seals and signatures. Chain of custody. Methods. Graphs I could not pretend to understand. She placed everything into an envelope and wrote my name in block letters. If you feel unsafe, call the police. If you need counsel, speak to an attorney. I shook her hand. I walked to the pharmacy attached to the hospital. I asked the pharmacist about my prescription and sedatives. He tapped a chart and showed a box where 2 lines crossed. Interaction significant. He touched the paper with a pen. This is the kind that can slow breathing. If you took this with whiskey, I would worry. He did not know he was circling my son. Outside. The river moved under a skin of ice. I stood on the bridge and watched a gull fight the wind. The envelope under my arm felt heavy as a brick. Proof changes the air. It makes the same street feel new. It also breaks illusions that held a family together. Back home, I cleared the table and laid out the papers. I read each page twice. Words like concentration and adverse effect, and sedative hypnotic sat on the lines, like nails in wood. I took a photograph of the report and sent it to my email. I placed the envelope in the old bread box, where my wife kept recipes she did not want to lose. Then I opened the drawer where I keep the address book. I found the card for a lawyer who had helped me with a boundary dispute years ago. I did not call yet. I set the card on the table and looked at it until the name blurred and sharpened again. There would be time for law. First, there had to be a decision about blood. I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. I told her only that I needed to see her face to face. She asked if I was all right. I said I would be. She said she would come after work. I did not mention the bottle. I did not mention the report. I sent Emily one line. Thank you for last night. You are brave. She sent back 3 words. I love you. I saved the text and put the phone down. The house was quiet as a chapel. Outside, the snow eased. I stood in the kitchen with the envelope against my chest and listened to the furnace breathe. My son had brought me a weapon in a ribbon. The lab had given it a name. Now I had to decide what to do with both. I spread the evidence across the table as if arranging photographs from another life. The report lay open. Numbers crisp. Ink official. Beside it, I placed receipts. Bank statements. Old letters. Proof of what I had given my son across the decades. I needed to see it all together. The cost and the betrayal in one place. The first file I opened held tuition slips. 4 years at the state university. Each semester I had signed the checks. Drained savings. And worked overtime so Marcus could sit in classrooms with polished floors. I remembered carrying boxes of textbooks into his dorm room. He hugged me quickly. Embarrassed in front of his new friends. I smiled, pretending not to notice. Next came the mortgage papers. After the financial crash, when banks had tightened their grip, Marcus wanted a house. He stood in my kitchen and said, "Dad, if you co-sign, we can have a future." I wrote the check for the down payment. Money scraped from a pension that was meant to carry me through old age. His name sits on those deeds because my name carried him there. Then came the folder of bailouts. The year his first business failed. I covered credit cards that would have swallowed him whole. $18,000 across 6 months. Another time. I signed over a retirement withdrawal so he could keep his car from repossession. I told myself it was a father's duty. That was the word I clung to. Duty. There were smaller debts too. Gas bills I paid without telling him. A doctor's invoice I slipped into my own pocket. I had thought love could be measured in quiet rescues, in sacrifices no one sees, but the pattern became a river, and he had learned to drink from it without shame. I looked at the totals. More than $200,000 over the years. Enough to build a new roof twice. Enough to fund Emily's future 3 times. Enough to prove that my life had been poured into him. Coin by coin. Hour by hour. My eyes drifted to the photograph on the mantel. Marcus at 10. Missing teeth. His arms slung around my shoulders. We had built a treehouse that summer. He climbed to the top. Fearless. And I steadied the ladder. Proud. Now I wondered if he remembered any of it. Or if the hunger for what I had now had erased what I gave then. The envelope from the lab sat heavy beside the memories. Evidence of poison in a bottle, meant to celebrate my birthday. It was not just about money anymore. It was calculation. Cold. Patient. Deadly. He had watched me age and decided to speed the process. I closed my eyes. Grief pressed against my ribs. Sharp and heavy. To lose a wife is cruel. To lose a son while he still breathes is another kind of death. I could hear her voice in my mind. Steady and warm. She would have said, "Protect Emily. Protect the innocent. Do not let the sickness of greed take her down too." I opened the final box from the basement. Inside were old photographs. Every Christmas and birthday we had shared. I studied his face across the years. The boy with skates too big for his feet. The teenager who grinned at graduation. The young man who held Emily in his arms the day she was born. That boy is gone. I thought. The man who replaced him carries my name. I gathered every document into neat stacks. Tuition. Mortgage. Bailouts. The lab report. A history of giving and a record of betrayal. Each paper whispered the same truth. Love had not been enough. When I looked up, the house seemed different. Shadows longer. Walls closer. I had spent a lifetime building. Fixing. Saving. Yet all of it now felt like evidence in a case I had never wanted to argue. I pressed my hand flat on the lab report and whispered to the empty room. "This is what it cost me. This is what it made of him." My voice shook. My chest burned. But the truth settled in. My son had already chosen his path. My choice now was whether I would follow him into silence or stand for what remained. I called the number on the card and asked for an urgent appointment. The receptionist said the attorney had a gap at 5. I put on a clean shirt and the old wool coat my wife loved. I carried the envelope under my arm like a fragile box and took the bus downtown. Morrison and Hale sat on the 12th floor. Glass doors and a view of the river. Miss Hale met me in a conference room. I slid the lab report across the table and spoke plainly. My son brought this to my home. I did not drink. My granddaughter warned me. I need to protect her and my daughter. I need to be clear about my house and my savings if anything happens to me. She read in silence, then asked 3 questions. Are you safe tonight? Do you have the bottle? Who in your family can you trust? I answered yes. Yes. And my daughter Claire and my granddaughter Emily. Then I added, not my son. We cannot change what he did. She said, we can change your documents. We can place everything into a trust for Emily with conditions that keep it out of her father's hands. We can also write a new will that mirrors the trust and closes loopholes. She opened a blank template and began to type. The words looked simple. Their meaning was a shield. Beneficiary will be Emily Hart. The purpose is education, health, housing, and modest living costs. The trustee will be a corporate fiduciary with no family ties. A co-trustee will be Claire Hart. A successor will step in if Claire cannot serve. A spendthrift clause will block creditors and parents. No loans to parents. No advances against future distributions. Distributions at steady milestones for school and a first home. What about Marcus? I asked. If you wish. We include a clear disinheritance clause, she said. We also add a statement of intent. In your words, it helps courts understand your reasons if anyone challenges. She turned the laptop toward me. Write what is true. I wrote with slow hands. I love my son. I have supported him for decades. He has chosen actions that place my life at risk and would endanger my granddaughter. My intent is to protect the innocent and remove incentives to hasten my death. This decision is painful. It is also final. Miss. Hale read the paragraph and did not change a word. She added a medical directive, naming Claire as my agent. She added a letter to the trustee with my wishes. Encourage Emily to study what calls to her. Do not reward, flash. Reward work. Pay for therapy when grief is heavy. Pay for braces if she needs them. Pay for a safe car when she is old enough. Never give cash to Marcus. Never meet him without a second person present. We printed drafts thick as a slim book. A notary and 2 staff members witnessed. My signature shook on the first page and steadied by the third. I initialed margins and signed tabs until the pile was complete. She sealed copies for me and for the bank. She gave me the address of a safe deposit box and a small key that bit into my palm. What happens if he tries to contest? The trust is strong, she said. The statement of intent is strong. The laboratory report is stronger. If you fear for your safety, we can prepare a report for the police. For tonight, tell someone where you will be. Do not meet him alone. I told her about Emily's text and the vial in Marcus's coat. She listened like a doctor listens to a heart. When I ran out of words, she slid a single envelope across the table. This is a letter to Emily from you. Write it in your own hand. Do not explain the legal parts. Tell her what you want her to know. I sat alone and wrote, Dear Emily, if this letter finds you, it means we built something safe for you. None of this is your fault. You are brave. You are not responsible for the choices of adults. Use this gift for good work and good rest. Call your mother when the wind is loud. When you doubt yourself, go outside and watch the river. Water remembers the way forward. So will you. Love, Grandpa. I sealed the letter. Miss. Hale placed it with the trust package and locked everything in a red case. She walked me to the elevator and pressed the button herself. When the doors opened, she touched my sleeve. You did the hard thing today. Go home by a bright street. Call your daughter from the lobby. I called Claire from a bench near the revolving doors. My voice wanted to break. I told her I loved her. I asked if she could come by at 7. She said yes, without questions. I put the small key in my pocket and felt its teeth. For the first time since the bottle entered my house, breath came all the way down. On the ride home, the river turned black under the bridge, and the lamps came on in a row like steady promises. I watched my reflection in the bus window. The face looking back was older than yesterday and steadier. I had not saved my son. I had saved my granddaughter. Some nights that is all a man can do. Some nights it is everything. I spent the afternoon turning my house into a stage and my fear into a plan. Preparation calms, a kind of shaking coffee, never does. I started with the bottle. I took 2 more samples in clean jars. Dated and sealed. Those would go to Miss Hale and, if needed, the police. Then I carried the poisoned bourbon to the sink, opened the drain, and watched the amber spiral away. I ran hot water until steam rose. I scrubbed the glass with soap until it squeaked. When it was dry, I refilled it from a fresh bottle saved for a celebration that never came. I matched the level to the faint watermark. Under the kitchen light, the color was perfect. No one could tell by sight or smell. I set the bottle on the coffee table. 2 crystal tumblers beside it. Coasters. A folded napkin. The lab report inside a plain envelope tucked under the tray. I moved the armchairs so we would sit directly across from each other. I opened the curtains so the streetlight would reach the room. I checked the batteries in the doorbell camera. On my phone, I set a shortcut so a double tap would start a recording. I placed the phone on the shelf beneath my wife's photograph. Next, I called Claire. I told her there would be a conversation I had to have. I asked her to wait at the corner coffee shop at 6:45 with the neighbor who keeps a big dog. If I sent the word blue, she would call the police and walk to my door. She did not argue. She only asked when to start praying. Now, I said. At 6, I ate toast I could not taste. I put on the wool sweater. My wife bought the winter. I set a second envelope on the mantel for Claire. It held a copy of the trust. A copy of the lab report. The key to the safe deposit box. And a note that said only this: if anything happens, tell Emily the river will carry her. At 6:15, I called my son. My voice was level because the plan held it there. I told him I had thought about what he said at dinner. I told him he might be right about modern arrangements. I said I wanted to talk face to face before I signed anything. He asked when. Tonight at 7. I said, come alone. He agreed too quickly. He said he had documents ready. He said it would not take long. I said I would pour us something to mark the occasion. There was a pause. Then a laugh that did not reach me. When the call ended, I walked the room again. I turned on the lamp behind his chair so I could see his face. I set the glass he would use a little closer to the bottle. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and winter air. The furnace clicked and settled. I pictured each step. Offer a seat. Offer a pour. Let him drink. Say the words. Show the report. Open the door. At 6:40, I texted Claire one word. Ready. She replied with blue if needed. I placed the phone beneath the photograph and double-tapped to rehearse the soundless start of a recording. My hands were steady. Fear had not left. It had changed shape. It had become focus. Headlights slid across the window at 6:52. A car door closed. Steps on the walk. I opened the door before he could knock. Marcus wore a darker suit and the same cologne. He carried a leather folder and the ease of a man who believes the finish line sits 10 feet away. He looked past me into the room as if to confirm the stage. Nice to see you, he said. You sound better. I said I felt clear. I let him hang his coat, but kept it on the hook nearest my hand. We sat. I poured. The bourbon was clean and it shone like a lie he thought was true. He raised his glass. To new arrangements, he said. To clarity, I answered. We drank. He took a longer sip. While the glass was near his mouth, I tapped my phone twice and felt the tiny buzz of the recorder beginning its quiet work. I set my glass down and held his eyes. This will be simple, I said. I went to a lab yesterday. They tested the bourbon you brought. They found a sedative at a level that could stop my breath. His smile died in stages. He touched his throat. The glass trembled on the coaster. What are you talking about? That bottle is fine. I slid the envelope across the table and let him see the letterhead and the numbers. He did not pick it up. He stared at it as if it might explode. Do you know what it is like to read your death in a paragraph? I asked. Do you know what it is like to keep breathing anyway? He tried to laugh and failed. There is a second envelope, I said. Trust documents you will want to see. But first, read. Then you and I will finish this. Marcus stared at the envelope but would not touch it. His jaw worked like a man chewing glass. The confidence he carried through my door was leaking out of him. Drip by drip, I leaned back, giving him the silence to feel its weight. Finally, he muttered, You don't understand. I do, I said. I understand perfectly. You tried to kill me. The words landed between us like a hammer. He flinched, his hand tightening on the armrest. His eyes darted to the bottle, then back to me, as if searching for proof that I had actually drunk what he believed was poison. I went on before he could speak. You wanted my house, my savings, my years. You thought if I died, it would look natural. An old man, bourbon in his glass, gone quietly. You even chose something that would mimic age. That's not planning, son. That's murder. He slammed his hand on the table. Stop calling it that. You don't know what I've been dealing with. Debts, calls from people you don't even want to imagine. I didn't have a choice. There is always a choice. I said, I raised you better than this. I gave you everything. Do you remember your tuition? Your mortgage? The months I covered your bills? When you couldn't stand on your own? $200,000 over the years. Maybe more. You had every choice. His face twisted. And what about Claire? She gets the easy ride. You always favored her. She never needed help because you handed her everything. I shook my head. Claire worked. She taught. She lived within her means. She never asked for more than what she earned. You mistook fairness for favoritism. He leaned forward, eyes burning. You should have just signed the will, updated the trust. No one would have questioned it. I'm your son, and you lost that the day you poisoned my glass. I said. His mouth opened, but I raised my hand to stop him. I reached under the tray and pulled out the second envelope. I slid it across the table. Slow and steady. He snatched it open, his fingers shaking, and found the truth printed on every page. A trust in Emily's name. Ironclad. Irrevocable. No access for him. No loopholes. I spoke while he read. Every cent. Every brick of this house. Every account. It all belongs to your daughter now. You cannot touch it. Not through her. Not through Claire. Not through me. I have protected her from you. His breathing grew ragged. You can't do this. Courts won't allow it. They will, I said. The attorney made sure. The lab report. The statement of intent. The witnesses they will all hold. And if you contest, it will only expose you more. He shoved the papers back at me. Face red. Voice cracking. She's my daughter. You can't cut me out of her life. I met his fury with calm. I didn't cut you out. You did. The moment you chose greed over family. The moment you let money matter more than blood, you wrote yourself out. He stood suddenly, chair scraping hard against the floor. He pointed at me, shaking, desperate. You think you've won, but you've ruined everything. You've poisoned her against me. I kept my eyes on him. No. You did that when you poured from that vial into my birthday bottle. Emily saw you. She warned me. And she will remember who protected her. He froze, his lips parted, then shut again. The silence pressed heavy. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was. The boy I held steady on ice skates. Lost and angry. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had calculated my last breath. I rose slowly and walked to the door. I opened it wide, letting the winter air sweep in. You have 60 seconds to leave this house, I said. If you don't, I will call the police. And this time, they will listen. He stood, trembling, folder limp in his hand. Dad, you stopped being my son the night you tried to kill me, I said. Now get out. His eyes darted around the room one last time, desperate for something to grab onto, then dropped to the floor. He shuffled past me, coat unbuttoned, steps heavy. The cold swallowed him as he stumbled into the night. I closed the door with a final click. My body shook, but my voice held steady as I whispered to the empty room. It's over. I stood with my hand on the door for a long minute after it closed. The house hummed as if it were catching its breath with me. I sent Claire one word. Safe. She replied that she was on her way anyway. I did not argue. I poured the clean bourbon down the sink and left the glass upside down to dry. My hands would not stop shaking. So I folded the dish towel twice and pressed my palms against it until the tremor eased. Headlights washed the window. Claire came in with the neighbor at her shoulder. She looked at my face first, then at the room, then at the bottle on the table. Tell me everything, she said, voice small and steady. I told her. I told her about the lab report and the trust and the recording that was still running under her mother's photograph. I told her about the vial Emily had seen. I told her about the words he said when he thought I had drunk from that glass. When I finished, she covered her mouth with her hand and sat down hard. The neighbor stood guard by the window with his big dog leaning against his leg. We made tea because people do that when there is nothing left to do. I played the recording. Claire listened without interrupting. When it ended, she nodded once. The way a person nods when a verdict lands. We called Miss Hale's after-hours line and left a message. We called the non-emergency number for the police and asked how to file a report without setting our lives on fire. The officer said, bring the documents in the morning. Bring the sample. Bring the text messages. Bring the names. I changed the deadbolt that night. The neighbor held the door while I worked the screws out. Claire swept metal filings into a dustpan like a woman cleaning up glass after a storm. I put the new keys in her hand. Keep one. I said, come whenever you want. She nodded and did not trust her voice. My phone buzzed and stopped. Then buzzed again. Voicemails stacked up from a familiar number. I did not listen. I turned off the ringer and set the phone face down. Claire squeezed my shoulder and whispered that love and safety are not enemies. They are a pair. You can love your son and still keep him on the other side of a locked door. I pressed my fingers to my eyes until the room steadied. We drove to the 24-hour bank and placed a full copy of the trust and the report into a safe deposit box. The little key felt like something alive in my pocket. We left the branch and stood for a moment under the winter sky. Claire's breath made clouds. Mine came in short puffs. She said, Emily is staying with me tonight. I said, good. Tell her I kept my promise. Back home, I opened the closet that holds our old life. On the top shelf sat a shoebox with a cracked lid. Inside were programs from science fairs and winter concerts. A crooked clay bowl. A photo strip from a county fair where Marcus wore a paper crown and stuck his tongue out at the camera. I took the strip to the kitchen and set it beside the report. Two versions of a life looked back at me. A boy I would have stepped in front of a train for. A man I had to keep away from my door. Near midnight, the furnace clicked on and the house warmed enough for grief to move. It came slow. Like a tide, it filled my chest and emptied me. Claire held my hand and let me cry for the son I lost while he was still breathing. She cried too, but not for the same thing. She cried for Emily and for the way families break even when everyone tries to hold the edges. In the morning, we went to the precinct. The desk sergeant took our statements and copied the lab report. The officer listened and did not rush us. He asked for the sample. I handed over one sealed jar, and the chain of custody form the lab had given me. He read Emily's texts without commentary. He wrote down the words, enjoy every drop. He wrote down the word vial. He wrote down the word sedative. He said a detective would follow up. He told me to keep my door locked and my phone on. At Miss Hale's office, we handed her the recording and the fresh keys for the safe deposit box. She filed an emergency notice with the court to protect Emily's interest and prevent any attempt to move assets. She asked if I wanted a restraining order. I said yes. She told me it would not solve grief. It would solve distance. Sometimes that is enough to keep people alive long enough to heal. I called Emily from the lobby and told her I loved her. I thanked her again for the message that kept my heart beating. She asked if I hated her father now. The question split me open. I told her the truth. I hate what he did. I love the boy he used to be. I will never stop loving you. She cried and tried to hide it. I did not hide mine. Days found a shape. Locks changed. Documents filed. The bottle gone for good. I started to sleep some nights. On the bad ones, I sat in the chair your grandmother loved and listened to the furnace and the old clock. On the better ones, I cooked for Claire and Emily and sent them home with food for the week. One afternoon, Emily came over with a poster for school. She needed scissors and tape. We worked at the kitchen table where the bottle had once stood like a warning. She asked for my opinion on a title. I told her it was strong. She laughed. The kind of laugh that shakes a room back into the present. And I felt the house grow lighter by a degree. The voicemails stopped after a week. The quiet was loud at first. Then it became air again. I kept my phone on anyway. Snow thinned and the city thawed at the edges. On Sunday morning, I made pancakes the way Emily likes them. With too much vanilla. Claire brought berries and a smile that looked less tired. We ate at the same table where the bottle had once sat like a warning. After breakfast, Emily asked if we could go to the river. We walked the path where the ice breaks into slow squares. She took my arm without asking. The way a person learns to do when love is heavier than fear. On the footbridge, the water below sounded like breathing. She said, "Will it ever feel normal again?" I told her, normal is a place we build plank by plank. We stayed until the cold pushed us back to the car. At home, I opened the bread box and took out the red case from Miss Hale. I showed Emily the letter I had written for her. She traced the envelope and slipped it back without opening it. "Not yet," she said. I nodded. Some words are scaffolding you save for the day you need to climb. A detective called that afternoon. He spoke in careful sentences. "The report is strong," he said. They would reach out to Marcus. After the call, I sat in my wife's chair and watched dust turn in a shaft of winter sun. Justice is a slow machine. Mercy is a person's choice. I kept both in the room and waited for my breath to find its rhythm. When evening came, I cooked a small supper and washed the pan before the water cooled. I poured a finger of clean bourbon into the old crystal. I raised it and spoke softly so the house could hear. To Emily, who saved what could still be saved. To Claire, who steadied the roof when the storm came. To the boy I loved, wherever he went. To the man I must learn to live without. I took one sip. It tasted like wood smoke and winter, and the edge of truth. I set the glass down and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the furnace clicked. I looked out at the quiet street. Snow held tire tracks like a map. Tomorrow I will change the porch light to a brighter bulb. I will oil door hinges and label photographs that still need names. I will take Emily to the hardware store and let her choose a paint color for the spare room. I will keep the river in my pocket for days that ask too much. I will breathe and make breakfast and answer the phone when it rings with a voice I love. I am an old man who almost left too soon. I am also a father who stayed. Tonight that is enough.